Okay, we're going to walk through some of the basic steps of photo restoration. A lot of this you know already. We're going to be adding a few more things that Photoshop can help you do to get you to repair images that may have some issues. So here's my original. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the file that I have been editing and walk you through what I have done. I've been duplicating my layers as I go along. To a certain extent, I think that that is a good work practice when you create your document. It will allow you to build your document slowly and revert back a little more easily should anything go astray. So the first thing that I needed to do, you can see that this particular document that I need to fix, which is a picture of the Markhams. This is my in-laws family, and there's quite a yellow-green tint happening. So there's a couple of ways that I can fix this. One way that I did was to desaturate, okay? Or if I want to keep some of this tone of not necessarily go all the way to black and white, I created a cooling filter. So in order to do that, I'm just going to make a sample here to play with. I went to Image and Adjustments. Desaturate is down here. This will make it totally back to grayscale and black and white. A note of caution, please don't go here and choose grayscale. Do not do this one. Okay, that's going to make it so that if you even ever needed to add color to this photo, you're going to be pigeonholed into a black and white document. So instead, adjust, desaturate. Okay, so that got rid of all of my color. I'm going to Control Z to step back. And the other option would be to correct for the color tone. Now you could go and fuss in color balance. That's definitely a choice. And if you have a color photograph that is faded, you might want to try that. But I bet that nearly all the time, photo filter will get you where you want it to go. So adjustments, photo filter. There are a whole pile of choices, individual colors, and you can actually choose your own if you wanted to. So, but because this is on the yellower and greener side, I actually want to be, it's a yellow light, I want to cool it down. So as I choose the cooling filters, and there's actually a couple of choices here, so I'm going to pick the one that I like closest. You can decide how much or how little. So I can make it quite blue or not at all. I'm going to choose something on the kind of relaxed side. And you can see how that is just relaxing and calming down the color here. Okay, so whichever direction makes sense for you, that is what you're going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and delete, and we're going to go ahead and work with a desaturated version. Okay. So the next step that I did was to use one of the Photoshop filters to create as much or to get rid of rather, to remove as much of the dust and scratches as possible. So I'm going to duplicate again up here, just so we have some place to play. Up here at the top where it says filter, and go to noise. This will be where we start off. And so this is about either adding or getting rid of. And dust and scratches is a filter available to us. So there are two places to interact with. We can do radius and we can do threshold. So the higher the radius, the stronger the blur, and some very weird things start to happen. Okay, and if I have the threshold down and increase that, the increasing of it is going to end up making this filter more specific. So the lower that it is, the blurrier it gets. So notice if I make my radius high and my threshold low, we're really distorting this quite a bit. So radius needs to be on the lower side. Okay, you're probably not going to go more than 1 or 2 pixels at most, although you will just have to see for your individual photo. And then I'm going to increase the threshold to the point where it is helping. Okay, so if I click and unclick, we can notice, especially look right here in this area, it is removing and softening some of those pictures or those dust and speckles, but I'm not really losing a lot of detail in the face. So right around in here are the best settings for this particular photo. Whatever is going to work for you is going to vary depending on where you are. So we'll say okay. So this is by no means a magic fix in this particular photo, but it is getting rid of some and saving me a couple of steps. So that's good. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that copy, and there's the dust and scratches that's been created. So then my next step is going to be to use my spot and healing brush. Okay, and we are familiar with this now. Spot and healing, just make a copy again just to play for a second. The spot and healing brush is over here on the toolbar. Spot healing brush does not require the alt click. Regular healing brush does too. I haven't written it into this layer, but this is also a place where you might need to clone at some point. Again, word of caution, when you're using your spot and healing brush, you want to be as close as you can get, and you want your brush to be as small as necessary for the spot. If you make this ginormous, like you can't make your spot healing brush this big, that one will take forever, and two is going to create some really weird actions happening there. Okay, so the point is to make the tool the size of the spot, or as close to it as you can. All right. This is going to be, edging on a little bit of tediness, but it'll go fast. What I suggest that you do is that you work methodically, meaning start up in a corner, work here in this section, go over left to right, and then up and down. If there are places that have texture, hair, or patterns on clothes, you may need to be switching to the clone stamp so that you can keep the pattern there. Don't forget, when you clone stamp, you have the ability to change hardness, and in that situation, if you're preserving texture, you'll want a hard brush, harder, and you'll probably want the opacity quite up. So if I'm going to need to pick up, say, part of this fabric here and move it elsewhere, you're going to want to make sure that you are using a harder setting. Okay, so that took a second. Honestly, it didn't take a whole long time, to be truthful. Maybe 5 to 10 minutes, to be honest. And I've done spot and healing everywhere. Now, you can see there are some places that are not done yet. Okay, in the interest of time, I wanted to be able to get this video out to you. They're not completely done. And if I zoom in very, very close, you'll see there are still some places happening that I need to address. But a huge difference so far, and we're definitely moving in the right direction. Okay, so when you are happy with spot and healing, okay, the next step would be to address lighting and to darken or lighten the areas that need to happen. Okay, so here's the after, okay, after burn and dodge, and the before. So we have created that. I'm just going to make a copy to play on by using my burn and my dodge tool. I'm going to, when I'm burning, pay attention to shadows, midtones, and highlight, or shadows and midtones, pardon me. And then when you dodge, you're going to do highlights. So what I'm doing is focusing on the areas that were supposed to be darker in the first place. I have low exposure, and my brush is quite soft. Okay, so I'm working now, this is midtones, nice and gently. And then we're going to do the same thing with the dodge. Now we're going to work on highlights and brighten, especially faces. Okay, so we'll create that until we feel like that's making some sense. Okay, so just a little nudge to help. So at this point, you might find that your document is a little softer or a little blurrier than it needs to be. And there's a tool called Unsharp Mask. There's actually a couple of sharpening filters that are available, but Unsharp Mask is nice. Now, this is subtle. Okay, we're going to zoom in a little bit so that you can see the difference. Okay, so here's before, here is after. Before, after. It's a subtle change, but it is meant to just crispen up your edges, and I do strongly caution you to make sure that you are making this subtle. So let's make a copy again, and I'm just going to play here. So under Filter, Sharpen. We have a couple of choices. I've used Unsharp Mask. It's related to a photography process that would happen with negatives in the darkroom. Sharpen edges and sharpen you won't find. You have a lot of control in, and they don't do a whole lot, not in any kind of speed anyway. Smart Sharpen's not bad though. So if Unsharp Mask isn't behaving, you might want to look into that. You can decide how much. So if I do a whole lot, okay, like that's not necessarily a good thing. We're getting distortion happening here. You'll notice we have that radius and threshold again. So you want to adjust those settings. Now at this time, if I move my threshold up, it's softening because now it's going the opposite direction of my dodge and burn, or the, my despeckle. So threshold's going to be lower, radius is going to be a little bit higher, and amount just means how strong this entire process is. Okay, so be gentle, but it will help you crispen up any edges as you're working. Okay, so we'll go ahead and toss the practice one, and there we go. And then I want you to notice that I've done a levels adjustment, but this levels adjustment has actually happened at the very end, as opposed to in the beginning. Normally we do levels first, and I'm actually suggesting that you do the reparations of dust and scratches and tears and any of that kind of stuff first, and do some specific burning and dodging before we do levels. Levels is going to be an overall change, but notice the before, and here's the levels after. I've intensified the dark and the light just a little bit, but if you do this too soon, it's going to end up intensifying dust and scratch areas as opposed to the corrected place when all said and done. So we did this simply by going to adjustments and levels. We're familiar with this part, and just use my own judgment to decide how much to move over. Okay. So, a couple of other things that are available to you. Right above the burn and dodge tool is the blur tool. This one's kind of handy. Definitely helpful if you have areas that are big areas of background possibly that you want to soften, that have texture or other artifacts happening. You could use your lasso tool to constrain and do areas, and then now use the the blur tool. There's a strength, okay, and it does have some options for modes. This is actually another place where you can play with how much color is here. So we're going to leave this as normal, and as I click, okay, this is going to soften here. You'll notice this is not a particularly strong moment. Okay. Oh, sorry. And you know what? It's a whole lot stronger if you're on the layer that you can see. So 1 second there. Let me move back up here, and let's do that up here on the very top layer. So if I concentrate right there on that dot right there, okay, that is a whole lot softer than it was a minute ago. Okay, we'll go up to the top. Okay, look right here. And then we'll go back to the end. You can see the change. Okay. Some things that I want to caution you about, though, especially if you're using a selection to help constrain your tool. Okay. When you go to select, that select menu at the top, you can actually transform and modify this selection. So one of the things that I want you to think about doing is feathering or softening the edge of your selection. So it's going to ask you how many pixels. Keep in mind 5 pixels is not terribly wide. Okay, so I might do like 10 pixels wide. And what that's going to do is make this a blurry edge. It's kind of like using a blurry tool or a blurry brush on a tool, except it's doing it for a selection. So I could use this blur tool, but I actually could also go to filter. I could either go to blur, or I could reduce noise, and median is kind of fun, especially for these background areas, because what it will do is soften the overall edge. So you can see that went quite blurry quite quick. Okay, so I would be cautious about going too much about that, but even at 3 pixels, that's doing a whole lot of softening. And if I say OK and Control D to deselect, it's actually because I softened that edge, it's giving me a softer, blurrier edge happening here. So I can do that same thing with my lasso tool across the whole board, okay, and use that filter, so median in this particular case, to soften those areas. But I just got ahead of myself. Before I do that, I'm going to feather my edge. It will keep your last settings available. So in this case, I was doing 10 pixels. So soften the edge, and then go to filter and median, and this will average. You might also experiment with the filter and blur. Of these, Gaussian is the nicest one to choose. So Gaussian blur will just soften and otherwise fuzz out. But that's a really nice way to save yourself some time, especially if you have a background like this that is all one color and is a studio background. You can soften and save yourself quite a bit of time for cleaning up. And that is about it. Those are the skills and tools that you'll need. Now it's just about, frankly, taking some time and being as careful as you can. So again, methodical, in a row. That is the key to this entire process. All right, good luck.